No, what they woke up to is, oh, this is really bad. My constituents want to see some action to prevent this terrible gun violence that is hitting communities all over the country. And
welcome to Americans Democratic Forum conference call with Congresswoman Honorable Jan Schakowsky on a very important topic, gun violence, legislations, and its effectiveness and moving forward. As you all know, over the past several months, this country has been reeling with gun violence, and it has been hit multiple times with multiple shootings. So we are honored to have the Congresswoman, very senior Congresswoman with us, who is going to outline what the legislation, the bipartisan legislation passed has its effect and how to effectively implement that legislation, number one. Number two, the Supreme Court recently also gave its verdict in the New York case of having the concealed arms strike down. What are the implications of that vis-a-vis this legislation? How we are going to move forward with effective implementation of this bipartisan legislation. As we all know, in 2020, there were a higher number of deaths, almost about 50,000, if we take the statistics from Center for Disease Control, out of which, if we roughly estimate 120 deaths per day, and 35% of those are related to homicides. So we have the Congresswoman who are the front lines for the legislation as well as the implementation. So we would like to hear from Honorable Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky on how this legislation will affect, what are the ways forward to prevent gun violence in our society. We have seen recently, as recent as Highland Park in our Chicago, Illinois, getting affected with a mass shooting. So she will speak for about 10 to 15 minutes, after which we will have 2 or 3 questions, and then we promised the Congresswoman to leave her within the time frame of 30 to 40 minutes. And then we will continue our conversation after the Congresswoman leaves. So probably she will take 2 or 3 questions. So before she starts, I would ask everybody to please mute. I know the people are joining in now. So please mute. I will allow them for another 5 minutes, but please make sure that you mute the mic. Congresswoman, please go ahead with your speech on the gun violence effective legislation and its impact and how to prevent gun violence, and what are your thought process on this? Thank you so much.
well, thank you, and thank you, Dr. Jamil. Thank you, the American Democratic Forum. I think it's fantastic that your organization, can you hear me? Okay, that your organization is now up and running and so important, and your voice is so important. So yes, I want to talk about gun violence, and I want to start with good news. You know, there was finally, after 3 decades of zero action on guns. You know, way back during the Clinton administration, there actually was an assault weapons ban. There were a number of violence protection acts that were in place. But of course, the assault weapons ban expired, and it has never been renewed. And there has been literally no action on it. And the conventional political wisdom is you don't want to get involved with guns. And for a long time, it was not only Republicans, but Democrats as well. You know, just stay away from the gun issue. What has made the change? It has been grassroots action that has actually changed the politics and the policy. For it is not because members of Congress suddenly woke up and said, oh, yes, this is really bad, we have to take some action. No, what they woke up to is, oh, this is really bad. My constituents want to see some action to prevent this terrible gun violence that is hitting communities all over the country. And yes, here in the Chicago area, we saw 11 people killed in Highland Park, Illinois. Just terrible. But it was because of the grassroots action that finally we were able to get the Senate, and certainly as well as the House. The House has been passing very important anti-gun violence legislation for quite a long time. But we got a bipartisan bill that passed the United States Senate as well as the House and was signed into law by the President of the United States. Now, it may not do everything, but I do want to tell you some of the wonderful things that this bipartisan bill called the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. And included in that, what we found is that it closes what we call the boyfriend loophole. It used to be that only a spouse who had been convicted of domestic violence would be unable to have a gun. And now we said that it is rather a boyfriend, a partner, if he's been convicted of domestic violence, he is not entitled to a gun. So that was an important piece of legislation. We sent money through this legislation to cities and states, places like the city of Chicago. And some of that money will be used for community-based violence prevention programs, which is very important and have proven to be effective when you use people from the community themselves. We have enhanced background checks for people who are between 18 and 20 years old. We need to do more, but now we're going to look more carefully into the young people like the shooter in Highland Park. And then we also invest in mental health services. Now, I want to say something about mental health. By and large, people who are mentally ill are more likely to be victims than perpetrators of violence. Nonetheless, though, we do have a crisis in mental health. And I have talked to students at high school, a number of high schools just last week, that are scared to go to school. Some of them are refusing to go to school. So we definitely have mental health issues, and money will be provided for children, for teenagers, and for adults as well. The legislation also does a crackdown on illegal trafficking of guns. This is a problem in a state like Illinois that has great laws, except that people can go across the border and just open up the trunk of their car. We have people who go into gun stores and then as soon as they walk out, we call these straw purchases. They just turn the gun over to someone who really wants it. Sometimes they're paid to do that. Sometimes they're forced to do that. Anyway, so gun trafficking and straw purchases, we're going to do a crackdown on them. Those are things that are in the bill. And some people say, well, it's just not enough. But I want to tell you, these bills will save lives. But I agree, we have to go further. The House of Representatives, we haven't been able to get them passed in the Senate yet, actually has gone further. We actually passed in the House, an assault weapons ban, that those weapons of war simply have no place on our streets. And we think, as they were years ago, we need to simply ban assault weapons, and they just take them off the market altogether. We also need to have universal background checks. Any person who wants to purchase a gun be it a gun show, be it online, wherever, you would have to get a background check before that purchase would be approved. We also want to have legislation for safe storage of guns. You know, there are guns in homes that are just, in a closet somewhere. We hear these terrible tragedies of family members actually getting a hold of the gun, children, teenagers, deaths because they use those guns, even if they didn't mean to. We have to have safe storage, require that these guns are not able to just be taken easily and put into use. The other bill we passed, very important, it's a red flag law. What this says is that people who are inclined to do harm to themselves or others, who are recognized by someone in the family or friends, can report that. And it will be adjudicated in court that those people will not have the guns. And doctor, as you pointed out, that many of these gun deaths are suicide. Do you know how many people in the country of Japan were killed by guns last year? And of course, there was the tragedy of the prime minister. There were 10 gun deaths, gun murders. The United States in last year, 50,500 people died at the hands of guns. Yes, some of them, many of them were suicides. We're the only country, and that's because of the easy access of these weapons. I like to say sometimes weapons of mass destruction. And here in the United States, it's just about the same number of people that were killed during the entire Vietnam War. What is going on here? And so we're going to continue to fight. I believe it is possible after the next election, when we just have a couple more votes in the Senate to protect our communities. We maintain a majority in the House of Representatives of members who will vote to protect us in our communities and in our schools. We can do this. You can do this. And that's why I am so thrilled about the creation of this wonderful organization, that hope that a good deal of your focus will be on getting people out to vote. So those are really my opening comments, and I'm happy to take questions on gun violence. And I think the future is bright if we elect the right people and we continue to fight.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman, for your remarks there. I would like to also begin the question and answer session for about 10 minutes. So starting off, I would like to ask you, Congresswoman, implications of the Supreme Court decision striking down the New York concealed carry laws, which allowed for reasonable limits on the guns. As you probably witnessed in other states, that the weapons display trying to threaten the voters also was a major issue. So does this law, which is a bipartisan law, also passed in June, took into account that Supreme Court decision, or whether there is any upcoming legislation to circumvent the Supreme Court decision in this regard? What are your thoughts?
Well, I want to tell you right now that it's going to be hard to trust this particular Supreme Court right now. The laws in states, etc., for virtually no supervision in some states. You can just go in and purchase a law. And then the court decision in New York by the Supreme Court indicates to us that the Supreme Court is in, does agree. But here's the thing. The Congress of the United States, when it passes a law in the House, the Senate, and is signed by the President of the United States, overrules what the Supreme Court says. The final arbiter of what the law will be is determined by the Congress and the President of the United States, elected officials. Let's remember, the Supreme Court is not elected. But so all what we need is to have enough people who will vote despite the Supreme Court, and I know you wanted to talk at some point about the abortion decision too, can be overruled. And that's what we need to aim for. And we can begin to do that after the November 8th election, depending on who, of course, gets elected. So this is an extremely, I honestly think, you hear politicians say all the time, this is the most important election in history that I've ever seen. I do believe that this is the most important election that we have seen. And the name of your organization, I think, really tells the story. That if we want a democracy, we absolutely want to be able to make decisions that reflect the will of the people. And right now, I think what we are seeing are decisions by states, decisions by the Supreme Court that are against what I believe the values of the American democratic form really are. So we can undo that. We can improve it. We can win.
Thank you. The next question, I had in my mind, Congresswoman, is to bring to you the attention under that bipartisan law, what is called an Extreme Risk Protection Order, ERPO. Recently in Highland Park, I'm a physician at North Shore in your district. I will be voting in your district coming November. So I want to know from you, what is the implications, what are the effectiveness of this ERPO, Extreme Risk Protective Order, in that bipartisan legislation passed, which states that the law enforcement agencies, and for that matter, extending up to the physicians, if they find anybody at risk of committing gun violence, to be restrained or getting a court order to have their weapons confiscated. So I would like to get your opinion on how is it being effective? Because we saw in Highland Park, obviously didn't catch the attention. So do you think that pre-screening methods before obtaining the weapon license, or working up with a physician network to screen the mental health disorder in any individual, is that something more effective community-wise?
Well, you pointed out the legislation. I called it red flag. It's the same idea. I mean, that's the same bill that I've been referring to, that would allow physicians, that would allow family members to say this is a danger, that it would be a danger for this person to have a gun. But I think the idea, in addition, screening, of having the opportunity to even get a gun, that we have more checks. There was a time when the federal government wasn't even able to have copies of background checks. The federal government was prohibited from doing any research on gun violence. This was the power of the National Rifle Association and the gun manufacturers to limit any, think about that. We have more rules that protect children from toys, from, every product. I'm chair in the House of Representatives of the Consumer Protection Subcommittee. We have laws about almost every product except for guns. And so I would, I'm in favor of the extreme risk law, which we also call the red flag law. But I think the more we do when we screen people, someone had a suggestion at a gun table that I had that you have to apply for your gun license in person. Now think about that. If you want to apply for a driver's license, you have to show up. And you can't just submit something in paper. To just all kinds of ways, I think, to really put a limit on accessibility to guns, because I hear from kids in high school, the easiest thing is to get, you can easily get a gun. I live in Evanston, Illinois. We've seen a number of shootings in Evanston, Illinois, and killings in Evanston, Illinois. And let's be clear. Yes, we saw Highland Park. We see these mass shootings, but on the weekend, the 4th of July weekend of Highland Park, more people were shot at and killed in the city of Chicago and elsewhere in the area than in Highland Park. What we say sometimes the everyday shootings, a few here, a few there, someone accidentally gets shot. It happens all the time. This has got to stop. So any kind of suggestions that you have are welcome for putting into law to make sure that we protect our communities and limit access, the easy access to guns for the United States, as I pointed out, is unique in the world.
Thank you. Last question from my end, and then I will give to Maria. She has some follow-up question, and after that, I will give you the choice if you want to stay, or I know you have 2 more minutes with us. So last question from my end, Congresswoman, thank you for answering that. And, I want to bring to your attention about the school safety. So the incidents which happened, it may be in Houston, Texas recently, and the other school shootings. How do we see in the bipartisan legislation which recently passed, the school effective mechanism in vis-a-vis additional law enforcement agencies presence in the school, number 1. Number 2, effective screening of the students by the existing setup of health personnel at the school who can screen this kind of disorders which can bring about, or effective teachers' skills or training skills provided to identify the students who are vulnerable to commit the gun violence. So are there any provisions for additional funding to provide additional law enforcement presence or effective security measures near the schools? Because no parent should worry about sending the child to the school without having to hear this bad news. So Congresswoman, that will be my final question, and then I will ask Maria Peterson also.
Thank you for that. And just let me say, I am not, my schedule is not as confined as you might think. So don't worry about the time so much. I'm so happy to be with you and to talk to you and to be of, any counsel that I can be to you and be a partner with you. So at this gun violence table I had, a number of students from local high schools were there. And honestly, I had not totally understood. My children are grown. I didn't understand the depth of the fear, particularly of some of the students. One girl told me that she and her siblings were purchased by their parents bulletproof backpacks, which makes it really heavy, and they wear them. She said she wears it. She won't even put it in her locker. She wears it all the time at school. It's very heavy. and just the constant fear, because they are having these tests, you know, where what happens if there's a active shooter in the building, and you know, so the depth of the anxiety. Well, a number of students suggested that there be metal detectors in schools. You know, I know some schools, maybe private schools, are not, you know, the kids feel comfortable, they feel confident, but I really do think that we can have a technology that doesn't look so ominous. We can have designs where you just simply walk through a couple of bars, you know, it's not even that obvious that, you know, what you're going through, especially for children. They could be decorated with stickers and, you know, look more friendly to walk through. I think that is a thought. I think that would be a good possibility. I know that there is some resistance. We don't want to look like we have armed guards at school all the time, and this, you know, really menacing kind of atmosphere. But, you know, we have technologies, I think, that could develop something that is barely noticeable when the kids walk through, and yet would give parents and the children, the students, I think, some peace of mind. Because, you know, these kinds of things, I met a girl just last week in Washington. Her class was visiting. She was stabbed by a knife in school. So it's, you know, it's guns, it's other kinds of weapons. I am moving toward the idea that that metal detectors done right could be a good answer, because we have seen when we have police inside buildings, even armed police, it hasn't necessarily done the trick. I think the prevention, finding out if there's a gun, is a much better one. That I'm gonna float that with some gun violence, anti-gun violence experts, and ask my constituents. And I'd really like to hear what you think about some kind of metal detectors. Would that do the trick in terms of peace of mind?
Thank you. Thank you. Now I would bring in Maria Peterson, who is the candidate for Illinois Senate. Maria, please briefly introduce yourself and ask a question very briefly.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Jamil. So I'm Maria Peterson. Welcome again, Congresswoman Schakowsky. Good to see you this morning. Yes, I'm running against the current and incumbent Republican individual who most recently got an A from the NRA, and I am wearing my F very proudly from the NRA. But more importantly, Congresswoman, pardon?
Where is your district?
Oh, forgive me. It covers Lake, Cook, McHenry, and a small portion of Kane County. It's 20 villages going from Libertyville, Mundelein, Vernon Hills, Long Grove, Palatine, Hoffman Estates, all the Barringtons, Algonquin, and everything in between. So 120 to I-90.
I would say, be sure, if you aren't already, that you're in close contact with Ben Head, my political director. Okay.
Yes.
So that can be involved. Okay, go ahead. Tell
Yes.
me.
We actually we're planning a day of action with you and I together to canvass.
Excellent.
But one thing I do have a question, because it is a federal issue. Good to see you too, Ben. Is there any way to eliminate the immunity that gun manufacturers have for the deaths that are caused by these guns? You know, there's amazing how they have the immunity, whereas toy manufacturers that cause accidental deaths, they do get sued, you know. but gun manufacturers don't. And this is a critical issue. And we know the NRA is, strong lobby to make sure that these gun manufacturers have immunity, but what can we do about that? And that's my question.
You are so right. The one player in all of this that has been virtually untouched have been the gun manufacturers. And the time, I think, is really up on that. And we absolutely have to create some liability, some responsibility for the gun manufacturers. So far, actually, I don't believe that anything has been even introduced along those lines. But I am anxious in my subcommittee to have some control over the gun manufacturers, to hold them accountable, to hold them responsible. You know, what the pro-gun people like to say is that it's not the guns, it's the shooter, the gun owner. Well, that would be like saying to the tobacco companies, who we did hold accountable, it's not the tobacco, it's the smoker. Really? No. We have done that in the past. We have held big corporations responsible for what they do, and it's certainly, and the absence of that is pretty shocking today in 2022. So thank you for bringing that up. I wish I could even point to a piece of introduced legislation. You're right to prod us to get busy. Thank you. And I look forward to being with you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Now I would like to get a student's perspective on our forum. Saad is an upcoming lawyer. He is a student at DePaul, graduated from Stevenson recently. Saad, if you're hearing me, if you have any concerns from the student's point of view or any questions, please go ahead.
Hello, Congresswoman Schakowsky. It was great hearing you. So my question is, as you mentioned, many young people have concerns about gun violence in school. And I have conversations with my friends about this, and some of them also express these same concerns. So from your perspective, what would be the best way to handle these conversations and to advise people, especially people of my own age, in this climate?
Well, let me just turn it back and a question to you. What do you, first of all, if you have any ideas, but what do you think about the idea of some form of metal detector can be non-threatening, appear that way? And I can't believe that in today's technology, when we know how to build all kinds of things that are, friendly looking, that we couldn't do it. What do you think that would help?
I actually really like the idea of metal detectors. And I've spoken among my peers. Some of them believe, it would be it would make school kind of a weird environment. But, I'm from the opinion that I think safety is above all else, and I think it would work. So I like that idea personally.
So I think I like that idea. And honestly, people have told me that there are metal detectors with just like two things that stand up, two like pipes almost, and you just walk through them. You don't necessarily have to have an armed policeman on the other end, just somebody who observes. So I want to explore that a bit more, but the fear that, do you sense that in school, that students are fearful?
Yeah, I have conversations with some of my friends, especially when, mass shootings happen and a lot of people are talking about it. There are people who express concerns about moving to certain states and not wanting to move to certain states because of these things, and just like school in general and not wanting to come to school. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah. No, we have to act on this. I don't think I fully appreciated this ongoing anxiety that so many students, maybe not all, it's got to be on people's minds, if you say, as you said, after something like, you know, the mass shootings that we've heard about and experienced too close to home. But we need to come up with some answer. Oh, and by the way, there was a mention about teachers. There's no way that teachers want to be armed. And that has been an absolutely crazy idea. We have a teacher shortage now. I think if teachers somehow were forced to have guns, that we'd really have a serious teacher shortage. You know, as it is, I'm sure having them trained and exercised in what happens if there's a shooter in the room is scary enough and burdensome enough for teachers. But let's just dismiss the idea of arming teachers.
Thank you. Now I would call upon, a couple of people have raised their hands, Congresswoman. So please, as we move forward, please let me know your timing so that we can adjust the questions accordingly. But, we will probably end our Facebook Live here. And, and then I would ask Saad Jamil to please give a vote of thanks. And then we will take additional questions after the vote of thanks without being on the Facebook Live.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Congresswoman. My name is Saad Jamil. I'm a student at DePaul University and the youth coordinator for the Americans Democratic Forum. On behalf of the Americans Democratic Forum, I would like to thank Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky for her time and her helpful insight on gun violence in the United States. It was a pleasure hearing your points and your suggestions, and as a future student of law myself, I benefited, and I know that the people watching and also the people in this call did as well. Personally, I was happy to hear that going forward, the focus will be on young people, background checks, and mental health issues. And as you mentioned, I have had conversations with my peers who have feared to go to school due to the gun violence, and even people who live in other countries and other states that say they won't immigrate to certain places due to these concerns. So it is comforting for me to hear that these new changes and these new bills will save lives and make real change. Lastly, I would like to thank all the participants in the call, as well as the Americans Democratic Forum executive team who gave us their time this weekend. And once again, I would like to thank Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky for your time and your insight as well. Thank you very much.